So, giving your photos away to make money definitely sounds like a contradiction in terms. Another contradiction is that I can say on the one hand that I've tried this and it doesn't make money, yet I can also say that I've made more money by putting my photos on public domain stock photography sites than I have through regular stock photography or image sharing sites. What I mean by this is that I think it's highly unlikely that you'll make any significant amount of money either way. In my case, I've made only peanuts through both regular stock photography sites and through public domain sites, but more peanuts in the case of the public domain sites. However, there are also other reasons you may still want to put your pics on public domain sites, and I'll outline these in this video too. In this video, I'll look at several public domain photography sites, including Unsplash, Pexels, Pixabay, and public domain pictures. I have put my photos in the public domain on other sites too, but in the interests of brevity, I'll stick to these sites for now. And these are certainly enough to explain how they work and how they don't. Public Domain Pictures was the first public domain image website I opened an account at, and as you can see, my account is still active, although it's a long time since I put anything on it. It seems to be a relatively small setup, but judging by the frequency with which photos on PDP come up in online searches for public domain images, it also does seem to have a lot of pics available. Only photos of less than 1920 pixels in the longer dimension are completely free. So-called premium images, which means anything larger, apparently require a $2.99 membership fee, from which the photographer gets 6 cents for each premium pic downloaded. So, only 2/3 what I was getting from iStock, but on the other hand, 6 times as much as what I got from 500 pics. Like all public domain stock photography sites I've seen, it's sponsored by a major non-public domain entity, in this case Adobe Stock. And of course, this probably accounts for a large chunk of the site's income. It includes both illustrations and photos, in my case traditional media illustrations, so anything goes. And this is its license. This is an important point. The other 3 sites featured in this video all used this license originally, but now all have their own licenses, prohibiting resale of unaltered images. This was probably a response to sites like Algorithmic, taking public domain images and reselling them as if they were copyrighted. It also has a monthly photo contest as an encouragement, and a list of top members. This one seems interesting. Unsplash is probably the biggest name in this genre, if only because it's a Getty Images property. Although some would question whether it really is 100% public domain with its new license, from the point of view of users, it certainly is. You can download photos and use them for free for any purpose, commercial or non-commercial, without giving the photographer attribution. It's been a Getty Images property since 2021, and at the time of making this video it claims to have over 5 million photos and more than 330,000 contributing photographers. Being such an upwardly mobile site, it was an obvious choice for me to open an account at, although my account was short-lived. Looking around, there has long seemed to be quite a lot of debate among professional photographers about the ethics of putting photos in the public domain, and Unsplash, being the most prominent public domain site, has taken the brunt of criticism. Most of this revolves around 2 issues. 1, making good professional quality photos free, and 2, the principle of allowing people to use your photos for any purpose. But I had a different ethical question. I mentioned earlier the issue of 500 pics becoming part of the Visual China group, and the concern photographers may have with the EXIF info of their work perhaps being accessible to the Chinese Communist Party. It's also worth noting that Getty Images has long had a partnership with the Visual China Group. So, I make a point of removing the EXIF info from any photo I put in the public domain, as I don't think anybody getting my pics for free has the right to demand EXIF info. But maybe I forgot to do that with the first batch of photos I submitted to Unsplash. However, after uploading the second batch, I got a message from Unsplash pointing out that my photos had no EXIF info. I wrote to them to tell them that they did indeed have no EXIF info, that this was lost in the post-production process. They wrote to me stating that if photos had no EXIF info, the photographer had to fill in a form providing various personal details, including physical address, to be sure that the photo or photos submitted had indeed been taken by the photographer in question. I wrote back asking how exactly such information would be used and how a physical address could possibly be taken as proof of a photo's authorship. They wrote back simply repeating in more words what they had already told me. I, for my part, reiterated my own questions, and they could not or would not answer them. So I closed my account. Now on to Pexels, another big name in the copyright-free stock photography world. Founded in Germany in 2014, Pexels claims to have a library of 3.2 million free stock photos and videos, growing each month by about 200,000 files at the time of making this video. Like most such sites, there's a donation option for users, which I guess is something very rarely used. As to my own experience with Pexels, I have some positive things to report and some not so positive things too. Let's take a look at the site's strong points first. The most obvious thing in its favour can be seen from my view numbers. 5 million views, far more than I got on any image sharing site, or even sites like IM, which is also a stock photography site. But that's only half the story. I uploaded 1,000 pics to Pexels a little over 2 years ago, and at the time of my last upload, total view numbers stood at 400,000. So that increase from 400,000 to 5 million was achieved without a single further upload, which again is another sharp contrast to image sharing sites like Flickr, Upic, 500 pics and so on, where generally speaking, as soon as you stop uploading, you stop getting views. Another point in its favour, from my experience, is that I didn't need to treat it as an image sharing site in order to get those views. What I mean by that is, although I followed those people who followed me and returned likes for those who liked my photos, I didn't need to actively seek out people to follow or actively like other people's shots in order to get people to look at mine. In fact, I barely even looked at the site for over a year after uploading the 1,000th shot. Another point in his favour, compared with Unsplash at least, is that there is no EXIF data requirement. That meant I could upload these photos from Hong Kong, for example, all taken with a Minolta Maxim film camera over 2 decades ago. And yet another point in his favour is that minimum resolution requirements are lower than many such sites, including his sister site Pixabay. Okay, so I said there were also some negative things to report too. Well, actually only one, but it's something that has never happened to me anywhere else, before or since, so I think it's worth mentioning. Pexels has a feature called the leaderboard, and the leader is of course the most popular photographer, the photographer getting the most views of all. I normally have very little interest in things like this, but because I was uploading a couple of dozen already prepared photos every single day, which is probably an unusually large amount, I saw myself move fairly rapidly up this leaderboard, from something like 170,000th place up into the top 10,000, then the top 1,000, then the top 500, and finally into the top 100. I became quite curious to see how high up I would get. I think I got up to about 72nd place. Then something very unusual happened. my total view numbers began incrementing negatively, which is to say, I would have fewer views with each passing minute. And of course, I slid down the leaderboard just as fast as I had been going up. This went on for a couple of days. I could see that at this rate I would end up with no views at all. So I wrote to Pexels asking what was happening, and they replied that it was a bug, and they were working on it. Shortly after that, it was fixed, and my view numbers began incrementing normally again. But some of my most popular pics had disappeared completely from my statistics, and I never got those views back again. Was it really a bug? I checked some other people's accounts, but didn't see any sign of them losing views. Nevertheless, I felt inclined to give Pexels the benefit of the doubt. But even if it was just a bug, to me, the fact that it happened once meant that it could always happen again. So that really took the wind out of my sails. I had planned to upload 1,500 photos, but I decided to leave it at 1,000. Here are my statistics from the 29th of May 2021, not long before I began rapidly losing numbers. And here's the top shot, not long after the bug was fixed, down from over 3,000 to under 300. Finally on to Pixabay, Pexels' sister company. Both have been the property of a company called Canva since May 2019. The site now claims to have 4.1 million files, which seems like pretty incredible growth, as it claimed to have just 2.7 million 6 months ago. Prior to January 2019, Pixabay images were released under the same license as public domain pictures, the Creative Commons Public Domain license. Now, like the other 3 websites featured in this video, it has its own custom license, prohibiting the sale of unaltered copies of the licensed works or distribution as stock images or wallpapers. It's worth noting, however, that all images released into the public domain by Pixabay prior to 2019 are not affected by this license. They remain fully in the public domain, and the same goes for those released into the public domain by Unsplash and Pexels before they crafted their own custom licenses. Obviously, when it comes to view numbers, my experience with Pixabay has been very different from my experience with Pexels. I uploaded my first batch of photos, came back a week later to find I had not had a single view. That's even worse than most image sharing sites. So I had to go and like other people's photos to get a few views in return of my own photos. It may be unfair to compare with Pexels, as I've only had the Pixabay account for 6 months, and there are not so many photos on it yet, but the view numbers have not taken off in the same way at all. And actually, I had about 1 million views after 6 months on Pexels. So, as you can see, the upload process is very similar to any other stock photography or image sharing site. You enter some tags and a description. I'll skip the description here to save time. Then you have to review your upload and confirm it. And then it takes up to 3 days for your submission to be approved, or otherwise. But worst of all, you have a 7 file per week upload limit. This is more typical of image sharing sites, which use limits like this to promote their pro or premium account offerings. Here are my photos, and many of them are exactly the same photos already on Pexels. Anyway, that's my experience with Pixabay. It would be interesting to hear comments from anyone who has had a more positive response in terms of view numbers. Here I'd like to draw your attention to something interesting I noticed, perhaps just because I opened quite a few accounts with stock photography and image sharing sites. This is, or was, my Unsplash account, which was only active for a few weeks. Look at these view numbers. 17, 20, just 7. And then, wham, a massive 5,747. Well, what happened? How come this photo got so many views? Let's take a closer look at the photo. Is it really such an amazing shot? It's a nice photo. However, I don't think there's anything particularly special about it. Nothing to justify such a massive difference with the other photos. And this is an important point. This photo is also on several other accounts, with nothing like this number of views, even after several years, let alone just days, as was the case here. For example, here's the same photo on 500px, with just 443 views after 2 years. And on Flickr, with 363 views after a year and a half. And here it is on Upic, with just 1,412 views after 2 years. I can't prove it, but it's my opinion that this is a strategy taken by many sites like these. It may not be carried out by humans, it may be AI, but assuming you're a fairly competent photographer, someone that'd like to stick around, rather than someone who's just uploading a few blurry family photos or holiday pics, one of your shots gets selected for special treatment, usually not long after you open your account. It doesn't need to be a masterpiece. Probably the only person who's going to be thinking is particularly outstanding is the photographer, and he or she is also probably going to be asking themselves, why? What's so special about it? I know that was the case for me on Upic and Flickr. I was asking myself, what is it about this photo that's so special? Maybe I should scour my previous photos for others like it. Maybe I should just go out and try and shoot more photos like it. In other words, I was hooked. My account had suddenly become a central part of my life. Do stock photography and image sharing sites make fake purchases of their members' photos? This notion was first suggested to me by a fellow photographer a few years back. He noted that someone had made a post on some site like Reddit or Quora, I can't remember where, asking whether anyone actually made any money from those image sharing sites with a marketplace service. He pointed out that he'd had a number of photos accepted for the marketplace on one of them. They had garnered plenty of views and positive comments over a long period of time, but not a single sale. The founder of the site mentioned replied to the post that people did indeed make sales, although it could take some time for the sales to kick in. Shortly after that, the photographer in question did get some sales on the site whose founder had replied to him. The photographer then naturally updated his post in a much more positive tone, and that of course must have put the image sharing site in a good light. Still, I didn't take this notion very seriously until I started getting sales for amounts as low as 1 cent per pic. Then I realized it could be a very effective and cost-efficient way for such sites to persuade members with free accounts that there was a lot of interest in their photos, and that in turn would make such members much more likely to take out a pro or premium account. At the most, it would cost the sites almost nothing to make such purchases as an incentive, and in most cases it would of course cost them absolutely nothing, because most photographers would still not reach the $10 or $20 threshold for a payout. At the moment this is still an open question, with no way to prove it one way or another, but it's certainly a question worth considering.